There are 3 guard retention movements, well, 4 if you want to get like really technical, but there are 3 basic movements that you're going to use to retain your guard once you've blocked the leading edge, right? Hip escape, everyone's done like shrimping before. I'm going to go over a couple of details on the hip escape in a minute, but then you've got what's called a Granby roll, which some people just call an inversion, which is this. So when I say there's 4, sometimes you're going to do a full Granby, so sometimes you're going to go from your left shoulder to your right shoulder, but a lot of the time, most of the time, you're going to do a half Granby. So you're going to go like part way and then come back. That's really, so like, it's not that often that you'll use the full Granby. It's much more going to be the half Granby. So you've got your hip escape, you've got your half Granby or Granby motions, and then you've got your high leg, right, which is throwing this leg over so that you can reset your hips. Those are pretty much the 3 movements that you're going to use to retain your guard. So what we're going to do is break this down into kind of a system where we're going to block the leading edge, and you're going to either hip escape, high leg, or Granby. And then what the method that you're going to use to block the leading edge is either going to be a frame or a lever, because everything breaks down to frames and levers. So I'm either going to use a frame against my opponent, or I'm going to access a lever on my opponent's body. And that's pretty much going to be the system. The system is I either use a frame or a lever, and then I either perform a hip escape or a Granby or a high leg. So the first movement we're going to be going over is the frame and the hip escape. Now with the hip escape, what I have found really helpful with students is not counting on being able to hip escape with just a shrimping motion. So, and I'm going to go into a little bit of detail on explaining this and why it needs to go the way it goes. So stop waiting for a second. So how many people have learned how to just like shrimp the hip escape against like side control or mount? How often do you find that really works really well for you? It's like hit or miss, right? So I'm just going to side control. So, okay, so I'm going to go to hip escape, and what you'll notice is, see how Scott's got his elbow by my hip, right? He's got his knee by my hip. He's effectively put my hips in a box. So put a little bit of weight down on me, and I'm going to try to hip escape, and we'll see how well it works. Right? And Scott's not even trying. He's really holding on to me, and I'm kind of giving it. The reason that's not working for me is right now he has a frame, right? Frames support weight. His elbow is supporting his body weight as his body weight pins me in place. So until I can change this from a frame into a lever, I'm not going to escape. So what I'm going to do is align myself towards, notice how I've slightly turned towards him, and I'm going to bridge and hip escape. I know it seems like a really simple thing, but I find that hip escaping like this by itself is almost useless, certainly at the final stages. At the early stages of a guard pass, before somebody has pinned your hips, it can be useful, but I just want to make sure that you understand the distinction between just hip escaping and bridging and hip escaping. Because I want to try, I need to create space behind me. Sometimes, like let's say it goes into a guard pass just a little bit, and I get to here, and he's on his knees, right? And I want to hip escape right now. As I hip escape, if I've got good frames here, he shouldn't be able to get too much closer to me, but he can still follow me with this knee. So as I hip escape, he's going to do that. And see how like as we move, because he has greater mobility, the angles change, and now I'm no longer in good alignment, and he's able to seal the pass, right? But if we do the same thing, and I bridge into him, I create more space, and I keep him farther away from me. So whenever possible, when we're doing the hip escape, we want to add a bridge so that we can withdraw our hips into a space that we've created, rather than rely on our opponent to stay where they are while we do this, and they can just follow us if they want to. All right, so just make sure when you are bridging, when you are hip escaping, even if you're like already on your side, instead of just doing this, try to lift your hips. For one, you're going to reduce the friction of the contact with the mat, so it's going to enable you to move faster and move farther away. And two, it's going to make it a little bit easier for you to create more space, especially if you're dealing with a much heavier guy, and they're kind of like pinning, you're like barely holding them, and then you try to hip escape, and you don't move very much. This will allow you to create more space. It's also going to create later on, what we're going to work on is getting our elbow into base. It's going to create space underneath you to get your elbow into base. All right, so first movement we're going to do is frame and a hip escape. So what we're going to use for this is the knee cut pass, right? So let's say Scott moves into a knee cut pass. There you go. This is a pretty standard knee cut pass. Everybody knows how to do this. We don't have to go through the technique. Okay, perfect. So he's beat so many layers of my guard. He's past my feet. He's past my knees. All that's really left is my arms now. Like he's cosmetically still in my guard because he's kind of sitting on my leg, but really all that's left right now is this. I'm going to grip the collar. If this was no-gi, I'd just be framing him like this, but I'm going to grip the collar. So I'm starting with my elbow against my knee here. I'm going to punch. Now when I punch, I don't expect to move my opponent, right? Like give me a little bit of pressure. I'm not going to punch him like halfway across the room. What I'm going to do, give me a little bit more pressure, is push myself away. So that's my initial movement, is I'm not counting on being able to push someone away with my arm. As I do that, I'm going to pendulum this leg, and I'm going to get up onto my elbow. So I'm going to get to here, stiff arm, and hip escape. Alright, so all I'm doing is getting in the base with my elbow and setting a frame, and now I'm going to hip escape and reset my guard. So this is, if my hips are facing him, this is kind of the easiest way to explain. And this is, again, this isn't if a guy knee cuts, you use this. This is just the concept of frame and hip escape. We're going to do it in a couple of different ways, but this is the first one. Frame facing, hips facing him, shoulders facing him. I've got good alignment. I'm in the base. I have my elbow. It allows me to absorb force. Simple kind of check here. If I go like this, am I in base? Why not? I'm on my elbow, so I have a post, right? Start pushing into this guy. Okay, now let's start pushing into me. Base is a platform from which to apply and absorb force. Right now, my post, my base, my post is at a 90 degree angle. The force that Scott is generating is coming in at a 45-degree angle downwards. This is an important concept. Your posts have to match what's called a force vector. Force vector is the direction in which force is coming in. So right now, force is coming in roughly at a 45-degree angle. If my post is at a 90-degree angle, it gets collapsed. If it's at a 45-degree angle, it's able to absorb the force. So a lot of times if you've had trouble posting in certain positions, particularly half guard, this is extremely common if, just my half guard for seconds come down on me, where you've got an underhook and you're here like this and then the guy just flattens you out. The reason that's happening most likely is your elbow is right here. And then as he drives force in, you get flattened out. But if my elbow is here, when he goes to drive force in, you're going to feel like hitting a brick wall. All right, so we want to make sure that's the difference between not base and base. My elbow lines up my shoulder, lines up my collarbone, lines up to here, lines up to my other arm. Now I have a frame, same direction, and that frame matches the force vector as it's coming in at a 45-degree angle. So that's what I'm trying to do here. It's not like I'm punching his arm and I'm getting to my elbow. It's I'm creating a frame and I'm matching the force vector coming in. So he's knee cut, I made my grip, I'm gonna get my elbow out behind me. The more I'm turned, almost the better. If I start to go like this, notice that the angle changed, and instead of being a straight line, it's like a series of curves. Like right now, my chest is all concave. He's able to push into me, he'll collapse me immediately. So it's actually in my interest to turn this way because it aligns my arm with my shoulders, with my elbow, and now my hip escape is possible because he's not going to break through my frames. So kind of one of the most important things about guard retention is people panic to hip escape without establishing good frames. If you have good frames, you can kind of hip escape in your own time. I mean, I'm not going to try to say you should do it slowly, but if you just try to hip escape and your frames get collapsed, that's when your guard gets passed. But if I set good, proper frames with correct base and good structure, then as I move my hips away, I can be effective. And for those of you that ever watched like Shanji Hibero and the way he retains guard, basically all he ever does is just go like this. Just like hang out and eventually gets his guard back one way or another. He almost doesn't use anything else for guard retention. It's just frame, base, and hip movement. So everything we're going to do is based on the idea of blocking that leading edge and remobilizing our hips. Has everybody got that movement? You need to see it again? Yeah. Okay. So again, on my back, he's got knee cuts, and I'm going to let him get about this far. If he gets, notice where his shoulder is right now? If he gets his shoulder and pins me, it's too late. I can't do this now. So before he gets past Like he got past my first couple of layers, but before he gets this shoulder to my chest, I have to get my grip, I have to set my frame. Now I punch, pendulum my leg down, and pull my chest away, getting in the base. Hip escape, reset my guard. Notice I kept my grip the whole time. Don't just let go and flop to your back. Reset to here, so you have a grip and you have mobility. Right, I've got base. I can technical stand up if I want to, and try to work for takedowns, or I can play from my guard with good range management. All right, let's get a target.